Schönen guten Abend zum heutigen Vortrag von Kersten Geers. I will switch in English, in the bad English. Kersten Geers is one member of the office together with David Van Severen in Brussels. We met us the first time 2008 when they made a pavilion for Belgium. I don't know if you know this project. They made a wall around the pavilion and was a party place in a way. And the last time, I don't remember, he was involved in an exhibition by Bas Prinsen and Milica Dobalovic. And the last time is around 1 year ago at the opening of an exhibition in Augsburg in a space from Finstral. And I'm very glad that you're here now, and I'm sorry of the weather of the lecture at the university. Yeah, thank you very much for coming, and have a nice lecture of Kersten Geers.
Do you hear me? Yeah. Anyhow, thank you, Arno. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I had never been in Innsbruck, so I'm very happy to see the mountains. They're very beautiful, even in the rain. This lecture is, it's either very long or not so long, depending on how bored you are. After a certain point, you can just raise your hand. I can always stop somewhere. Many lectures recently are, I guess, for us, or for myself, me, and my partner David, of course, an attempt to develop an idea which is not yet fully there, and it's also fine, which is called the big house. And that's somehow in parallel with an understanding of the context in which we as architects operate, which I tend to call the large city. Now, both the big house and large city are kind of nonsensical terms, you could say. They're more, I would say, umbrella ideas which help us to understand to what extent, as architects, we still have influence on what is the project. I think that's ultimately, in our more than 20 years of office, it has been the general driver of what we do. And of course, you know, everything goes in and out of fashion, and we are also in the end not anymore a young office. And there's many, I would say, contemporary themes which cross with what you do today. Everybody's increasingly and correctly interested in what to deal or how to deal with durability and ecology. But I've always had the feeling that architecture, in some sense, has to try to find a toolbox in how it could deal with the world and how it also understands the world. So from that perspective, the big house is almost everything we do, I think, and at least I will pretend that's true tonight. And the large city is everywhere where we act. And before maybe the projects themselves are supposed to illustrate this, I wanted to show a little bit of studio work, work which we did with the students. And now more specifically, not so much the work we did in the further away past, but more in the recent past, in Mendrisio in the last 4 or 5 years, in studios which are called Everything, which are some kind of a spin-off of architecture without content. And Everything got its name from what you see here in the background, which is this work by Alighiero Boetti. There's many. They're all called tutto, so you could say they're all tutti, so they're all everything. They're all embroidery. And they're all somehow works he did more or less from the mid-80s onwards. I guess many of you know these works, which, make this kind of white noise made out of many, many colors. And each of these colors, if you look more carefully, are real objects, are figures, are signs, are elements one could in one way or another recognize. And so when we were doing in the last couple of years all these studios in Mendrisio now mostly, but also at GSD, and before that in Lausanne and in Colombia, we worked from that perspective. We thought, if we are surrounded by everything, with which I want to say it's a bit simplified way of seeing the world as being entirely urbanized, what kind of architecture can we still do? And whether it's here, what you see in Bellinzona, which we worked once in with the students, also surrounded by mountains, a bit like here in Innsbruck, and where we were trying to understand how architecture could still relate to agriculture and well-being in some ways, or it is in many different spots, like here. I mean, these projects made us work in Brussels and the Rue de la Loi, which is in fact where our office is. In each of these places, we tried to develop ideas which in parallel we worked on in books which we made somehow or somewhat next to this educational practice. So one of these, and it's already from a few years ago, is called The Urban Fact, which is, you could say, the better English translation, if you could call it like that, of Fatto Urbano, which has commonly been translated in English as The Urban Artifact by Aldo Rossi, but where we try to connect his ideas of architecture of the city, not so much to city and city restructuring, but rather to the fact that in this very era in which he wrote that book, 66, and I would say the 10, 15 years after that, and maybe the 10 years before that, that he was essentially working in Lombardy, you could call it in French the pavillionaire, or you could call it the ephemeral city, or you could call it the even covered field, or you could call it the large city. So in other words, the work or the imaginary of an idea of architecture and the city through architecture, and I think this school is extremely beautiful example of that, the Faiano Lona school, perhaps one of his best works of that time. Each of these works try to kind of introduce a moment of urbanity through an architectural figure, somewhere between an urban trope and a large house. So here you see some pictures done by Stefano Graziani, by the way, with who we did this show for Finstral last year. With who we work very often together, next to Bas Prinsen, who did a show here once, I think already more than 15 years ago. And so these pictures of this particularly weird school with its own geometry and symmetries, and how it's kind of placed in a context which seems to be in full ignorance to these symmetries, I believe has been important for us. Now, of course, we did not start working on architecture after seeing that school. The school somehow coincided, but I thought it was an important thing to share. Another, and it's about putting flags, of course. Another element which I wanted to share with you is a more recent publication. I think it's from last year, where we worked, through Mendrisio on Aldo and Hanni van Eyck, and we specifically wanted to work, first of all, on architects, which I always considered quite far away from our own practice. But secondly, also on work of them, I would say after the orphanage. I think any of you knows the orphanage of them, which is an interesting place, but in a certain sense also has been killed by its own publicity. Structuralism, Team 10, we all know it. And through this kind of tidal access of architecture, as you see it here, we worked on work mostly made, let's say, late 80s until early 90s. So the last work where also Aldo and Hanni were probably collaborating together. So we thought it was important, and I wanted to show it almost as the other side of the same coin. Next to Aldo Rossi, you see it here, this totally insane project for Aztec campus, which in fact is the ESA in The Hague, or next to The Hague, and which is almost like an architecture as in a continuous universe, so as a world. Now, these two elements in the air, everything as a background, the large city perhaps as context, and the desire to reflect upon the idea of big house. So I start. That was just the introduction, I'm sorry. The first project I wanted to show in this context is a project which I guess deals with this in its most extreme way. So you have here even on the left a little bit of Aldo and Hanni entering. You have here on the right perhaps the first plan we ever made for this project, now about 10 years ago. It was like a plan literally, as you can see, cutting out of Non-Stop City, typewriter version, kind of a ear shape, as you see. And then a couple of other references for what? For this project here, which is the radio and television building in Lausanne, on the campus of the EPFL. And so on the left here, I guess this works, is here, this is all EPFL, and on the right this is UNIL, and here is Pavillionaire. So we're in Switzerland. And I guess Switzerland, maybe not so much for you people here in Austria, but for us Belgians, Switzerland is kind of this really, really beautiful place with mountains. Of course, you have less that problem, I can imagine. But we have that, of course, in our mind. I realized that here the mountains are perhaps even more beautiful, so I think you're safe. But either way, so you have this campus, you have, in a way, this fantastic building, very, very well known, of Sanaa, the Learning Center. You have this Pavillionaire, and you have all this kind of motherboard-like context of endless kind of conurbations and additions of educational facilities. And in this competition, so we were asked to make a design for a radio and television building, which is strange because it's in a way the only building which doesn't belong to campus. It's not an educational facility. And at the same time, we felt it was perhaps the only place where we could reflect upon this, in a way, total urbanization of its context, because despite the fact that there's mountains, also Switzerland, of course, is just endlessly occupied. So the proposal we made was this endless, in a way, working space, which you see here. This is the model of the competition, somehow carried by boxes and also interrupted by these very boxes. So you could say somewhere between these two very famous, very well-known models. So here you see it collaged inside. You see a couple of versions. That's one of the early versions where there's a couple of émergences, as we call them in French, a couple of volumes carrying this ear shape. The ear shape is there because the site is like that. And in a way, I guess we wanted to round the corners in order to make it as endless as we could, you know, not to have abrupt cuts, so that the cuts made by the volumes themselves were more present. Now the cutting itself, and it's a theme which comes back, was for us important, and it's this kind of interruption. You saw it also in the Campo Marzio reference, where I went over quite quickly, but you see it very much, of course, in all these works of Baldassare, and here perhaps this one the most clear, and this, this square he puts in the scene, and you do not understand the scene is under tension, and in some way the scene becomes field-like. So here you see that. There was, of course, another theme, perhaps, that kind of the inversion of the learning center, you could say, and turning it in a far more pragmatic building. I love the learning center, but in some way it's an extremely open light building where not so much has to happen. And in our building, of course, it's a place of production. It's radio and television. I mean, there's a lot of kinds of production, but it's a lot of that. And so voila. So this developed, and I'd argue that in a sense it's a building without exterior. It's just in a sense an endless interior, carried and interrupted by these volumes, and in a sense an exercise simply in if architecture becomes the world, what can you do? So in a way you have open space and you have enclosed space. You have boxes in which things happen, which can only happen in boxes, which need protection, sound protection, organization, spatial kind of organization, things which also, by the way, change, because as I said, we won the competition now 9.5 years ago, and then we went through processes and processes, and that's also why I like to show these different images of different stages. See, this is a fairly early version, 2015, 2014, I think you saw before, I have to check, but this one, 2014 again, and then 2020. Basically, the building as it had landed, the building as we finally designed it for the client. So what I find interesting in this is that it defines, and it's weird perhaps to start with such a big building, but it defines our kind of toolbox as architects, which is on the one hand a very, I would say, obsessive formalism, this kind of four squares or rectangles carrying this ear. At the same time, these squares and rectangles endlessly transforming and changing, because we never know what happens inside, because media has already changed so much over time. At the same time, allowing somehow in its formalism that change. So here you see it on the ground floor. Now, if you want to know I guess it's everywhere the same. I mean, not yet in Belgium, I'll come back to that, but in Switzerland they have come to the idea that you don't even need kind of real editing spaces and recording spaces anymore. You just have big halls, and then the recording editing trucks park next to them, go to the garage, are repaired, and the moment a certain event is finished, they drive somewhere else for the news or something. So in a weird way, this building becomes partly a production of content, partly almost like a fire brigade, you know, like big buildings locked in, almost like plug-in city in some sense. And then somehow in campus, a mixture between campus-like buildings, blocks, and this big field on top, as you just saw. So here you see that it is now under execution. These are the sections that still think of the competition. And here, in a way, the images we had to make for the client to make them understand what are we actually building at this moment. So interesting for me here is this, how to say, this idea that a building which is entirely rational, one you could say, I mean, which is entirely open and entirely closed at the same time, ends up like this. So these are construction site pictures by Bas Prinsen, by the way, where you see, of course, this kind of multiplication of everything, multiplication of beams, multiplication of sheds, multiplication of, now here, of course, temporary pieces still to be installed, of the ducts and the installations. But all this as kind of a hypothetical answer on the biggest possible scale, or at least for us, the biggest possible scale of what happens if a building becomes city. So I'll show this here, and here, and here, and here. And here you see it next to the learning center, so you know it's in a way it's just there, it's like a big machine. And here again. Because perhaps it realizes more than what you could do before, that it all doesn't matter, because also these mountains, also that lake, also that kind of context, the building was not here yet, as you can see. It's just entirely covered, even covered field, the large city. So if you move to a next place, another large city, so to speak, a little bit less glamorous, but the real, and a picture taken more or less at the same time. We are in Charleroi in Belgium, and it looks like that. And you can hardly believe it because you think it's a collage. You know, you have this terril here, these very beautiful mountains, you could say, but in fact they're artificial. They're all the result of mining. You have the leftover of the mining buildings here. You have a couple of buildings which are still somehow operational. You have city. You have here a tower by Jean Nouvel, if you knows, police. Then you have a church tower, some other things, a flat. You know, it's like a kind of mixture of things in a way you think, wow, if I would make a collage, I wouldn't even manage to get so extreme. Where we were asked to, it's a French-speaking part of Belgium, we were asked to think of a new building for a satellite factory, so a factory which makes satellites. And so in a sense, in a context like this, everything goes on the one hand, but I believe, you know, the building you make has a certain sense of responsibility. So what can you do? Is there still an action you can make? Is there still a maneuver which makes your building, I mean, more reasonable than any other one, you could argue? So here we come. I mean, I do not know if we succeeded. We will start building it, I think, in about 4 weeks. But in a sense, the Charleroi, I mean, and here some references, it's, as I said, it has the beauty of it, which is of course also, according to many people, its ugliness, is the fact that everything is artificial, everything, even the landscape. But in a certain sense, since, for example, these terrils, they have been left alone for about 50 years now, because nobody didn't know what to do with them, really. They became natural themselves. So they kind of had all kind of plants and trees growing on them, and now they are even part of big trails and so forth. There's 36 in them in total. There's a lot of them, and they somehow they are similar yet entirely different from, for example, what you see here represented by the Bechers, these kind of furnaces or the leftover of them. At the same time, they're kind of there's a place 300,000 inhabitants in an area as big as Paris. So, you know, you see that reference. We were working with the students lately on this very place, and we were making this map. This map, it's still work in progress. We worked on it the last semester. We're working on it also this semester in Mendrisio. And actually under the title Large City, simply to make a drawing of it where all these terrils, all these quarries, plus also these strange leftover boxes, sometimes big buildings, perhaps also the Nouvelle Tower, as I just mentioned, and many other things. They become part of a landscape which is totally taking over everything, where in a way design strategy is almost archipelago-like. So in that sense, the Ungers reference you just saw, perhaps translated in this case in this strategy. Of course, as an architect, you don't choose your site. I mean, the site was given to us, but we could somehow convince the people, I mean the mayor, I have to say, which I think is a very enlightened figure, plus the people who are investing in this satellite factory. It's a kind of a startup which grows now very fast, and I think is a sign of this new economy in this part of Belgium, to make their big salle blanche what it is, a big white hall to make satellites here, to negotiate the figure of the building, to put the offices on top of the building rather than put them on the other side where they initially thought so, to keep a building I'll show you in a minute, which is here. It was an old kind of office building from the 60s, very beautiful building with an exoskeleton in kind of corten steel, and use it as a parking lot, as you can see here, the ramp we added, rather than to get rid of all these beautiful trees here, which I think in this patch of what is Charleroi, every tree counts, every piece of, even if it is an artificial landscape, we should keep. So in a sense, densifying everything by transforming a building which was in a way unsavable because this exoskeleton insulating it would be impossible, turning it into a parking garage, making a bridge and putting the offices on top of this building. So here you see a kind of idea of scale of what we have been working on at the time. I mean, I can skip this quite quickly, but it was important for us to understand better what we were doing. We had been working on a project in Bordeaux, actually. We won a competition years ago, and then it never got built, for this kind of weird industrial building there. Somehow echoed here in this project in Charleroi, and then this picture of this corten steel building, very beautiful at the time, now totally derelict. I mean, in a way, sadly so. So. Okay. So here the scheme, as I explained it with the scheme before, with the urban scheme. Here the plan, as you see, the top floor with all its holes, which is the office floor, and then the parking garage next to it. So here you see that again in detail. You see, we will come back to that crematorium later, which was explaining somehow how we saw the materialization. It's all very cheap. We're working, it's not the Switzerland of before. It's a very cheap building, but for that reason, equally urgent, differently urgent perhaps, and then indeed this kind of salle blanche which is included in this kind of bigger pill shape, so with the offices on top. So here you see an image of the top of the offices. I mean the kind of difference between the outer envelope and the bigger box, which makes these spaces on the ground floor, the view on the salle blanche, and then a view from the building transformed into garage and its bridge. You see it here as well, the bridge. I mean, the building, which is in a way looking almost like it was, but taken away all the windows and everything, simplified, and through that, I mean, kind of facing its new life. So here you see that. Where you see that in a way this big figure, like a gigantic box, is in a way the potential answer to that weird context. So I think a picture here we see through inside the place where they make the satellites and the offices above. So I wanted to show it because it's almost the inverse of what you saw before, but yet at the same time, of course, I think it deals with similar topics. It deals with the problem that these buildings in this context, they have only themselves. Because they have themselves, they have a tremendous responsibility on how they can transform context, and they have a tremendous responsibility towards their own figure, the accessibility of the roof, as you saw, the bridge, the existing building, also the ground floor and everything. So none of it is deeply accessible, yet enough to make city through one simple gesture. You see here, of course, how the scale deals with all the scales of everything, whether it's the housing slabs or the former industrial buildings around it. So Charleroi. Now Charleroi makes another jump to another place very different, and I go very fast over this one because I have too many projects. I apologize. to this, which is in a sense it's an artificially planted set of rows of trees, and it's an old project, so I go very, very fast. But for some reason, and I was endlessly thinking, do I keep it in? Do I keep it out? Kick it out? So now finally it's in. It's a drying hall. And the drying hall is nothing more than a building which dries plants. But what I like about it here in this context is the notion of artificiality and green. So essentially, what it does, it's in a tree nursery, as you see it here. That's the main street. All the rest belongs. Everything here belongs to this nursery. Some of it very geometrically done. Others are a bit wilder, because this is a family business. For 2 or 3 generations, they are nursing these trees. So what do? They nurse these trees, they sell these trees for example, big urban projects where all of a sudden 300 trees of the same kind are needed, or maybe even more. And so what then happens is that the trees should not be wet when they are transported, so they have to go in a place where they dry in some way. Not dry entirely, but there's no water on their leaves, and then they are transported. And so this is what the building does. The building, of course, in this artificial landscape is a box, like the one you saw before. It is box-like in all its aspects. It's, I think, one of the earliest versions we had in our office, in which we tried to work with this corrugated aluminium, which we have been using forever, for the simple reason it's an extremely cheap material. It's stiff on itself. The corrugation makes it stiff. The perforation, in this case, makes it kind of, wind blows through it, and the geometry of the building makes that, the water just does not touch the trees. So essentially, it's a building where the trees are in 24 hours, like a hotel for trees, you could say. And they're like, after they left the hotel, they're gone. So I like the building because it introduced many things in our office. So whereas this complexity of the first project perhaps summarizes many ideas, form, figure, city, urbanity, the second one you just saw is much more, I would say, a child of this project. It's a child so much that it is really an investigation in the material, in detailing. Anyway, the building is only interesting because, of course, we could get rid of all these typical profiles you do there, where the roof touches the wall or the corners, how you integrate the doors. Doors are strange and have weird sizes. And then there's this weird geometry. I already mentioned it, of course, also pictures by Bas Prinsen, all pictures by Bas. And you see this kind of strange hybrid also. And what comes here is that our interest in paint. So in a way, this is a wood laminated kind of beam on a steel column, both painted the same green. So in a sense, you see them as one gesture. Whereas, for example, here the beams, of course, are where the corrugated aluminium panels are held. So they, in a way, they carry from there to there against the wind loads. So in this side, you would have the same, but there you paint them in the same color as the facade. So in other words, paint makes you understand the project. So when there's no money, paint always saves you. So here you see that, and you see from inside to outside, and you see, of course, the extreme transparency on the building, and sometimes, of course, the opposite. So I wanted to show this, in a way, intermezzo project very quickly, to jump into this other sloping roof, and then they will come. We have a few of them. So we're far from finished, I'm sorry. But it deals with this artificiality of our current, say, so-called natural landscape. So the tree nursery is obviously artificial. Every tree is planted, every tree is there to be sold. This, however, the outskirts of Ostend in Belgium, it's actually the same. So what are we talking about? It's a crematorium. I'll show you about the crematorium. It will be placed here. It's a competition we won now about 10 years ago, I think. In what you see here is a landscape. The landscape, as you see it with all the trees, does not exist, not even yet. The landscape looks more like this today. Now, it's all polders. And as you know, polders, it's not the landscape here, but polders is in a way artificially gained land on the sea. So in a way, it's irrigated. It has these dikes. It has lines of trees. The trees and are there to keep the dikes alive. The dikes are there to keep the trees alive. It's under zero. So in a sense, this is a whole complex system of irrigation, which makes that this landscape can stand. So in that landscape, outskirts of Ostende. Ostende, but not so much outskirts, because in their head it's the outskirts, the way people used to build hospitals and cemeteries outside of the city, and very often the city today is there, right? The city is part of it, the city grew. It's not different here. So the city is already there, our leisurely city. I don't have to explain you about the leisurely city where people climb and I don't know, do downhill mountain biking or skiing, and there they don't do that, but I mean, they certainly hang around, and that is part of it. And so our proposal was, there was an old kind of brick factory here in this whole site. We got in the competition to move the building quite deep on the site. We actually originally with Bas Smets, landscape designer with who we worked, we had a very long road into it. They were somehow against it, it's a long story, but either way, Bas suggested to make this set of parallel tree lines, have access to it, and then approach the building from in a way, from the lowest side of the building, from there. So I don't know where you see that best. No, you will see that probably later. Well, you see it here on the top, but I hope you have a better view here. So I think this view here on the top explains this. So I think this was a very important idea. So how can you make this building, crematorium, one of the last contemporary programs, often still built by the state, although, but which are seeking for some kind of symbolism, but complicatedly, because a crematorium, many people with many different belief systems might pass by, many different belief systems might be cremated, their families, their friends might be around, and so in a sense you're looking for some kind of symbolism. We worked on this together with Richard Van Leth, the artist, but at the same time it cannot be too specific. It's not a church, but it does replace for certain categories the church in some sense. So I mean, what to do? It's a building which is super pragmatic. And at the same time, so here you see the original plan as we did it with Bas, but then actually the Green Party stopped this plan, which is rather crazy. I mean, I would vote for them, but not after this happened. Because there was too many trees, weirdly enough. But okay, so the point is, how do you represent this in a way problematic program? So, you know, it's, I don't know about here, but in Belgium, from non-existent now, I think 60% of all people who die are cremated, so it's an enormous amount. We thought together with Richard to make this kind of natuurmort, still life, fifth facade, table, flipped in some sense, so that, you know, you would relate this kind of composition to the, in a way, artificial nature around it. At the same time, it's a big box, it's a gigantic table, it's this is 50 by 50 meter. This box of 50 by 50 meter, the tilted table, the columns around it. It allowed us to organize, as you can see here, a set of parallel spaces following this tree logic. Have the cremation spaces in the back, the service spaces, the mid-sized spaces in the front, and then the lower spaces where people enter. So that was a bit the thinking. You see that here in the final plan. Here is where the machines happen. Again, there's a rule that people do not want to see smoke. So cremation should happen in silence, so to speak. I mean, it should happen invisibly. So you have to find a way to make these objects on the roof, which even include a smokestack, so to speak, but which will not emit visible smoke. So at the same time, you need a lot of volume, a lot of height, a lot of space here. This has to be generous rooms, of course, and then here where people gather, we decided it had to be very low, very intimate. So that's the section you saw, that makes the table, that makes the natuurmort, still life. Here you see, it's actually an entire different building. It's cut here. This is non-insulated, single concrete, produces a lot of heat, as you can imagine. And then I know that many people might not want to hear it, but then we heat the building with the excess heat of the exact burning of the bodies, which is extremely logical to do. But of course, if you tell it to people, they're always a bit, ooh, that's strange. But, well, you know, we should be responsible. So here you see that building in its landscape about a year ago. Bas kind of fought forever for his Bas Smets in this case, not Bas Prince. This is Bas Princeton picture of a landscape not yet done by Bas Smets, but with our building. Here you see that Bas then finally managed to plant some of his trees, which are part of this interpretation of these polders. And you see them here again, not, I think, because you see the picture a bit mixed. And you see how that table has this set of parallel walls, and these walls almost work like different stages in an organization of space. So here you see it again from the front. You see these objects, which are in a way these light objects to the main halls. This is actually the chimney. Then you have all these other halls with like, and this is inside. So the furniture is a whole story. We work together a lot with Richard on this. I mean, the furniture is fixed. The air comes in because, as you can imagine, I mean, people need a lot of fresh air in these kind of occasions, and all of this, I think, is done with the most, I mean, with the most precision, but at the same time with an enormous economy. So this kind of concrete walls carry that part of the roof. The infill are at the same time the sound buffers. The floor is very simple, and then you have these corrugated panels on the outside. You saw them, which make this slightly filtered, almost curtain-like relationship. So here you have one of the ovens of the crematorium itself, the cremation ovens, and you see this relationship. So that's the building. That's the landscape, and we move again on. So what I was interested in here, sharing with you, I guess, is many things. This building is ultimately an extremely pragmatic box, and perhaps what you remember of it, or I hope at least you would remember that from it, despite all its precision, sorry? Okay, no problem. Is this roof, this sloping roof, which somehow is the main figure, has these columns which don't really carry that much, but which somehow tells you, am I a table, am I a still life, what am I exactly? So as a big figure, who knows, a big house. So here we move to Brussels. It's a brewery building. It's a building we won about 8 years ago, I think. I don't know, I should check the date. Maybe 2018 it says here, so 6 years ago, so 7 years ago indeed. And it's a brewery. The competition was for this company called the Brussels Beer Project, and they have this particular branding. All their beers have this kind of colors in some sense, but they always change because every 3 months they make a new beer, and then the colors are different or the combinations are different. So I guess in the competition we thought, how can you make a building, and we are in this brewery, right? And Belgium has also these buildings. I mean, the current Kunsthalle, say, of Brussels, the Wheels is in this building. It's called the Wheels because Wheels was the beer brand. Very much like here, that was a former brewery with a beer brand. So there was a tradition, certainly in the 20s and 30s, the heydays of these kind of semi-local beer brands, before they got totally internationalized and eaten up by these gigantic conglomerates, where these buildings were built for, I would say, the craft of making beer, and as a showcase. As here we used to have these vats, very beautifully so, I mean, with the window, right? I mean, not looking at me from outside, but at the beer vats. I mean, that exactly was that tradition. Now, funnily enough, I would say with an influx of, if you can call it like this, a hipster culture, which is very interesting because I think this current culture embraces the craft, whether it's bread making, beer making, bike making, and so forth, many things. I mean, there's a new interest in embracing this craft-like industry, somewhere on the edge between the two, and trying to find a representation for it, and making buildings for it. So there's like this small, mid-sized entrepreneurs. I mean, I find these guys, they appear small, but you could say they're quite quickly mid-size, and they want that building. So we made that project. We had in our back of the mind many thoughts, as you can see here. But so we said, can you make a building which uses these colors as a gigantic flag or as a kind of big tent or something? And I don't have the image here, I think, but I guess many of you know the Pomona Temple of Schinkel, where you have this funny temple, and on top is this weird kind of tissue roof, this kind of little pavilion on the pavilion. That was somehow interesting to us. Let's hear the Pomona Temple. Oh, it's even there. So in this context, which is a place where, you know, you have the city, and let's work in the city. Let's have industry in the city. The city has industry, yes, at the canal, yes, where there's already a lot of other buildings from the past. Now, sadly, all this is gradually transformed into housing complexes. So here, on the edge, even a fairly poor neighborhood, I mean, of course, now quickly gets gentrified. You can question that. I mean, we proposed then for this competition this box. Very simple building, just a box, so just a perimeter, a wall, 4 openings, and then this roof which kind of lays on top of it, which of course has glass in between. So So voilà, here the roof, remember the roof of just before, but now the roof has color. The roof is kind of wants to be a flag, but it's obviously not a flag. It's still made out of corrugated aluminium. It needs all the detailing to make that happen. So the edges we have to make out of mirror alu, you see it here, so that it somehow disappears. I mean, it lays on top, but then you do kind of detailing of greenhouses in between. It has these symmetrical openings. You see them here already in the early collage, and kind of a bar on the top. And then also a beer garden somehow here, not yet ready, but here below, with all the machines, all this under that roof. So that's the thought. So here go fast through the plan, this kind of losange shape. And again, there's nothing. You can do almost nothing, but that's the exciting part. So what did we present to do? And it's very much in the tradition of what you see here. So in a sense, we made a set of tables. You see them here with these round columns, steel columns, with the big beams. The beams carry all the vats and sometimes the offices. In this building, which wants to be a concrete building, but it is not really, because it's a prefab concrete building, so it has these steel profiles as well, in which there's these prefab panels in between. But so painting these steel profile panels in the same way or in the same family as the concrete, so to speak, and turning with another geometry, round section, these tables, making them another family. I think here is the architectural strategy. So here you see that. You see it in section. You see that these openings, I don't think, you can see them here, these 4 openings are symmetrical to each of the facade and are in total ignorance to what happens inside. So also to give it this kind of house-like character, if you could say. I mean, is that so? I don't know. It's an idea. And you see them also, so the tables do not even follow the windows, like your furniture doesn't necessarily follow the architecture or what the architect had in mind. So here you see that. You see it here finished, so you see these kind of buildings. You see doors, I mean, they're too difficult to detail in glass, so you just make them plain aluminium, and so forth. So this is how it works. This is then, you know, the building from the front of it, which is the square in the future, but not yet there. And in the back is the weird garden. I think you don't have a picture. The alu edge. And these kind of, again, corrugated panels, as you see, I mean, the size of them is just, they go from beam to beam. We just had to decide to color the beam in either one or the other color. And so you have that rhythm. And so you have what you see here. So there's a lot of work in there, I have to be honest. A lot of work to get all this tubing right and have everything right. But in a sense, it's work done with the same stuff, the same material, as would have been done maybe with less work. And hopefully then I would hope we did it better than the standard with less beauty. So, you know, it's a house of an industry, a house of a craft. It's a very simple building. It's a working place. It's a big building. It's a big building. It's surprisingly big, this building. It's, yeah, as you can see here, it perhaps is a big house. So if I move on again, and that house is not so house-like, but it doesn't matter. So the technology and how you design with it, I think in this idea of an architecture, which is often not more than the perimeter, you see it here. So you see an office building, which was always an office building, as you can see here. It was always there. You see the building, yep, that was the building before, and that building, that's now. So in a way, it's a, you know, they have now very fashionable terms for that. Adaptive reuse, I think. But essentially, it's what can you do with this building when the decision is, actually we had advised against it, but the decision is to keep that building and to transform it and to make it so-called zero energy, and to keep it for only pragmatic reasons, which is that the zoning has changed, and it's an office for the province, so a kind of state kind of office building. And ironically, the province did not want to accept defeat and demolish the building and turn this into housing. They said, no, we want to keep our office there, but then we cannot demolish it, even though transforming it was obviously, more expensive, and one can even ask ourselves if you would do the whole energy sum if it was more interesting. But okay, we know buildings which have been transformed and buildings built around buildings, and then later you forget. I think this is a very good example. It's of course not the same level, but I mean, you know, this Palazzo della Ragione is fantastic in that, no, you go and see it and you think you see a Palladio building, but it's actually just a transformation. So let's say that was the ambition somehow. Can you transform this building in a way that it's zero energy, that it works in terms of its enclosed kind of ecological system. It works with the sun and so forth, but all the cold bridges are gone, and later you forget. So this is in a way the logic of the plan. So this is the existing building below, or the once existing building with all its extra outside staircases. We move them in. It has its own logic. It was only cold bridges. Now this looks black, but it's not black, this line, of course. And then we proposed in a way to make a building only with installations. So it's all these columns you think you see are in a way only ducts. And the ducts are there to make the airflow through the thing. Of course, minimum machines are here on top. And then the structure is the structure which we kept. So this is, as you can see it, you see how the building is built in front. And we thought it was interesting to make a building which looks almost rougher, more brutal, more clumsy, if I could say it like that, than the initial one. So almost like you turn it into a Flintstones building in some sense. You know, it's a kind of a heavy Flintstones building. And you show also at one corner that it's all fake in a sense, because here we turn one column. You see that here. I mean, so this is in a way the building as we offered it, and this is, it's not fake, but let's say it's not structural, it carries itself. So here you see the plan, and here you see the initial plan. So here you see another time the plan, you see the ducts, and you have to believe me, we use them all. That's the crazy part of it. And so it works. And so, yeah, also I should mention, so that's of course the north, this is the south, and then we had these plates which stick out, and they're perforated, and they're there, and they're calculated in order to kind of, to direct solar gains, minimum kind of overheating and so forth. So this is all there. But of course, if I don't tell this, nobody would ever know. So that's also the nice thing, I believe. So here you see, then the construction. See these prefabricated panels. You see the perforations. You see the structure next to it. You see how the structures doesn't fit. There's absolutely zero connection, and the new facade is in between. And here you see it finished with the in and out. Air. So here you see that we managed to convince the client to ask Rita McBride, the American artist, to make a work for it, or to have a work of her in here, and this is called Vent. So it's a kind of an insane, kind of sculptural, over-designed idea of vent, which is somehow I would say the soul of the building. So here you see on the outside, and you see that also some of the plates are a little bit accessible. Then we put this glass kind of in a way elements in the holes. I mean, that's a specific detail, so you don't see it. So there's a slight kind of angle. But most of it, they're inaccessible, which kind of gives a very uncanny aspect to the building. So here you see it in the north side, where there's almost nothing, and here you see it on the south side. So we move from that building, which is kind of, I would say a reflection on almost nothing. The building before and after is the same. To this, which is a school. It's a new architectural faculty in Liège, which is supposed to be built here. Am I right? Yeah, I think so. Here, it's supposed to be built in an old caserne. An old kind of complex, which is less old than people tend to believe it is, but okay. It used to be an old monastery, but the church is gone. Actually, the monastery buildings are gone. What now looks like a historical layer is in a way 19th century for some buildings, and then even 20th century for quite a few others. So in a sense, there's a lot of layering. And there's this kind of latent space here, this in a way beautiful square. Currently the architecture faculty is housed in here, and the arts faculty there, and somewhere things there. And this big building here is called the Manège, which used to be the horse stable, but is now actually quite beautiful kind of a cultural center. So the competition was how to, in a way, turn in here in this context, how this is the same site as you just saw it, how to make some kind of architectural faculty, knowing that architectural faculty owns, well, that's strange, but they own the open space here and these two buildings. So not that building, that's already ours, not that building, it's Manège. That building they seem to co-own somehow. And so what do you do? So here you have on the right Mike Kelly Educational Complex. Of course, I mean, why not Mike Kelly? Everybody likes Mike Kelly. I think we were interested in this, I mean, as you probably know, this weird model of all his school experiences, which were apparently very problematic, where you know, there was plenty of open holes, and so we were fascinated in this, in a way, this open hole. So what do you do with this hole? So then we were also fascinated with the fact that it was an architectural faculty. So architecture, what's architecture? You know, I mean, any building you do has an ideology connected to it. Any building you do has a program connected to it. Any building you do talks about architecture. If you want to make a building which fits in the current context, what does it fit into? What can you do? So we were like, we thought Liège, which is hard for me to prove here, but you should believe me, has a kind of weird tradition of modernity, of modernism. And we thought it would be pity to let go and to kind of so-called repair that that big complex, this kind of, in a way, historical context of this caserne, even though it was not as historical as I just mentioned. So that was one thing. And then we were intrigued by the Domcommuna. You know, we all know the Domcommuna, this idea of the big house, of course, there where you would live, and I mean, more or less collectively, constructivism. And see this model as a model for collective work in an architectural faculty. So combine the Domcommuna with this kind of strange long figure of the Paimino sanatorium. And perhaps as a second element, a second model, but next to it, this big courtyard of the Beaux-Arts. So in a way, conflicting architectural ideas, because you have to be careful that you don't make an architecture school which already, the moment it's built, and it always takes so long to build buildings, is dated or represents an idea which is already not from today. So anyhow, to cut a long story short, we kind of did all kind of other tests, knowing that that was their site, and so we tried to even take in the whole square and build maybe on the very back, which is only half their property. We ended up with, as you could imagine from the references I just shared, with a very long building which was trying to do an attempt to own this big court and make the architecture faculty visible in some kind of weird dialogue to this, in a way, beautiful, only historical building on the other side. So that was the strategy. This building was important for us, a building which in a weird symmetrical relationship would stand towards that building and which turn this complex into a kind of real dialogue with the art school. So here you see the tests. We made the first ideas, the course, what it could be, and also as a Domcommuna type, as a big structure, as a large wall, you can say here, you could inhabit and relate to the court. So here you see that, this is the existing situation, this is the proposal. It's like a gigantic, in a way, weird, modernist kind of hallucination, if you want, for atelier. Only atelier. So this is the atelier building. This is the big hall, as just mentioned, and all the other educational things, the classrooms and so forth, are in the existing buildings, in the renovated parts. So here you see that again in its kind of current section. The hall, all the floors which have a wall, always a wall. We thought it was important to offer a wall and a view. I mean, still a wall, not just computers, still a wall. Pin-up moment, so to speak. Still a wall, and the terrace and the view. So this is the hall then for all kind of other activities, and that's the typology. So here the wall and the back towards the manège, the front, that's the competition model with, in a way, just these terraces and nothing else, and the columns, and this the back. We worked together with Joris Kritis, the graphic designer with who we always work together, and he turned this into kind of a page, you see, Faculté d'Architecture. It's like a gigantic page which is laying there somehow, where the core connecting with the existing buildings is added. This is the hall here, the shared hall for many things, and here we see the back of that kind of gigantic, like very long, it's 90-meter long building. So here you see the collage of the competition. A bit of Daniel Buren here for some strange reason, and that relationship, in a way, fairly audacious relationship to the existing art school on the other side. So here you see it now, how it is finally, I mean, finished. Now we are moving to the definitive design. So you see here we actually worked much more on access from the court, which we thought was interesting. You see that here. You see here, in a way, the detailing of that wall and these plates and these columns and the beams. Anyhow, I'll skip that. You see the whole facade. You see the classrooms now, which are in a way just studios, and they're not classrooms, they're where you work. There's the wall, there's the table, there's a view. And then the big hall, and then the big hall as it is now currently in a way in its final, it looks kind of the same version as we are now pushing it in its next phase. So this brings me to this project, and I have no clue how I will make the bridge, but that's fine. So I think this figure as an insertion, which gives you a complete different idea of what urbanistically is imaginable, I think it's probably the explanation, the jump I would make to this. I mean, whereas this very long kind of constructivist object kind of turned the complete perception of that kaserne upside down, I think this building, this new radio and television building in Brussels, in Belgium, of course, might do somehow the same. It's a building which is supposed to replace the building on which we now stand, which is actually this building, a long slab. Funny enough, the slab you saw before here will be demolished, not by us, but it's the Flemish radio and television and the Walloon radio and television. They have decided to demolish this whole thing, this whole complex, build the new Flemish radio and television, and here the Walloon radio and television already now under construction. Now, this is a sad situation, you could say, and why demolishing all this? But that's a decision long time ago taken. But perhaps the big opportunity at least is that with this building gone, this enormous park will become an urban park. So that's what will happen. This building will go, there will be a building here, this will be our building there. We won the competition, and as a result, you have all of a sudden a building which in itself has to kind of make an argument. So here you see the new Walloon radio and television, French-speaking radio and television, the kind of pre-park, and then the park. So we wanted to make a building which announces the park. So announcing the park was interesting in this kind of caprarola way, like almost like a fortress. This is a pentagon, but ours is an octagon on which there's a gigantic pizza box, you could say. And so the pizza box on the octagon kind of make a building which have no real front or back facade. That was very important. So the figure here, like what you could see here, somehow kind of relates to the park which is already existing, creates this new idea towards the front park to be built, but also towards the back, which is not a back anymore in our building, which is this set of social housing blocks with this added tower that's still not built, but that's the plan in the current scheme, not our scheme. So that was interesting. So you see them here. So since we started with the RTS building, it's a building designed almost 10 years later. So, I mean, on the one hand, some things changed. On the other hand, things stayed the same. I mean, this is a building which is, of course, is Belgium, not Switzerland. So it's a very dense, very physical building below with all these big auditoria. There's no plug-in trucks yet in Belgium, so you know it's all a bit more old-fashioned. But in a way, this fortress, the octagon, has all its public entrances on 0 and -1, which is another 0 on this side, because these studios are one floor down with a canyon in front, where actually Matt Mulliken, you just saw, is doing the artwork for. And then, I mean, it's very basic fortress, like very physical, very finished, very final. And then there's 3 floors of this gigantic pizza box, 100 by 100 meter, which is in a way an endless mud building where the only thing you really define these 5 gardens. These gardens organize the space, all the rest changes so often, so much. We learned that from RTS at least, so that's what happens here. So we go quickly, that's the new situation on square level, that was on the park level. This is the back, where it's in a way 1 floor higher with entrances here and the steps. I mean, this topography is in a way given, and we try to use it in our advantage. This is this set of these studios. You can just see them here. They're not yet accessible. We have to take down these stairs. This is this ground floor level with this park we developed together with Bas Metz again. And then this is this other side. So here you see that, the entrance again. And then you go to the, this big event hall in the back, which if you're interested, you saw here, which is the only one on the ground level where you walk around. And then here already are the loges, which are part of the system of the other side. So here you go down in this canyon. These are where the studios are. And then, you see that actually the building, like this gigantic castle or this fortress or whatever, it's like it's even 1/3 bigger than you thought it was. So it's in a way, it's a massive building. It's, I think, 50,000 square meters. So you see that here. You see that street is in a way that street. We introduced this kind of octagonal column anywhere where we are under the octagon, which somehow gives a sense of idea in this kind of ground floor. And then you have this big space, 100 by 100 meter, which is in a way only designed by this staircase and these 5 patios. See these patios here. Everything else, quite frankly, again based on Lausanne, is bound to change. So this is the architecture. The architecture in this enormous size is nothing more in a way than these gardens. But of course they have to be well designed. They're stepped gardens. They have all its own materiality. And we take care of the rest, of course. But it's important to understand that the form of these gardens define its sense of collectivity, its civicness. Using these gardens here in this housing complex in Ghent, you could see a bit the same. I didn't show any single individual house, but some people who know our work a bit know that we've been many years working on these houses of the same rooms and similar, and rooms in rooms and dimensions of rooms. It was interesting in this regard, I think, in the idea of the big house in the big or the large city, that here the house becomes big in so much that it's a co-op housing, many houses, I mean 6 families, sharing gardens, early project of that, early version, old project here with this idea of garden. Here this first collages of garden, a garden which we'll still show. I'm sorry, there's still something coming. And then how you see here that in a way this house, these former rooms become in a way houses, and the gardens in a way as deep as you can go inside the plot define the architecture. So that the figure is so big, but at the same time the desire to organize so big still as well, that these gardens, and of course also the forcing people to communicate over these, because you do have to walk from garden to garden to garden in order to come to your house. So there's kind of a weird idea of sharing, but which somehow something you accept, for the simple reason that with that comes an amazing quality of living in an otherwise extremely simple idea of house, a kind of warehouse house, as you see here on the construction. And here these are quite recent pictures of the last couple of weeks, I think. The garden brings me then again, and it was probably an intermezzo as the drying hall was, to this, which is a library which we recently finished. We finished it in St. Martens-Latem, and it's a big house par excellence, I would say. It's a big house in as much that it's the biggest house of the area. You see it here. It's a house which I think tries to deal with this problem of what is public in our contemporary world, with which I want to say that here this famous Dan Graham alteration of a suburban house, I think, settles the argument. No, I mean, say, a house, you take away the facade and all of a sudden everything is exposed. Now, the question we would raise, and I hope that was already implicit in many of the other questions, is a building which has to have a civic role, does it have to be so transparent? Does it have to be so much giving? Or does it need the threshold to negotiate, to give protection, to organize, to bring in hierarchy? We believe, obviously, the latter. So what happened, this competition we did, it was a library for this city, this village. Well, it's a kind of a small city, St. Martens-Latem. St. Martens-Latem is an interesting place in that many rich people live there, but they don't pay taxes. So as a result, there's no money for infrastructure. So it took them 15 years to get money together to build a library, which is a bit sad if you ask me. And even then, they had to negotiate with the school in the back to maybe do library and some extra classrooms. So that was the brief. I mean, after many years of negotiation, library and extra classrooms, and then probably, if it could be, then perhaps cheap. So we said, okay, it's important to make this the biggest house in a way, a city only made by houses. You see that, big villas in some sense. So here you see that. And turn, in a way, the main feature, which is the library garden, the garden where you could read books, as the center part of it. And at the same time, you see that here in the early collage, this is kind of a later image, but it's kind of the same idea. So it didn't really change. This was the competition. But make it, in a way, only accessible through the threshold of the building itself. So here you see that. Many versions, I mean, Mulliken here around the corner. The court is in a way the half of the square side. You see that we did some tests before we got there, a bit of Rita McBride here again. Actually an artwork placed there by Richard Venlet later, actually now more very recently. And then you see the square in the circle, another quarter cut out for the refectory for the school in the back, a stair to 3 extra classrooms for that school, the patio, the court, the garden, and then that relationship between the building itself, which is in a way a gigantic shelf, and it's just the books carry the building, with Lawrence Wiener style, so to speak. The books carry the building, and that's it, which is of course a very beautiful idea, and it's a nightmare when you want to build it, because shelves, I think you all know that, carrying architecture, that never works. But we somehow managed after many negotiations, because simply, let's say, woodwork and its precision, shelf work, and then architecture, building and its precision, these things, maybe apart from Japan, they're a hard match. But okay, so the court, librarian space, in a way, the whole bookshelf all around. The refectory, which can also be an event space for poetry reading or anything. I mean, the toilets and a little kitchenette for the refectory, for the school. And as you can see, only here the entrance opening and then a few openings, one which still shows a glimpse of the library, and then only openings towards the school. So nothing here. That was important. The court, the classrooms on the top. And here you see the building as it is. So here you see it towards the back, towards the classroom. So here you see the entrance, you see here, it's just finished, you see here a glimpse of the library. Again, inside the library, you see that these shelves carry the building, which was the difficult. Well, not actually these, because they stand in front there in the back. You see them here, actually here they run through. And then here the court with that kind of writing, Richard Venlet. So here you see them again. So literally, a library as a big house, a house which kind of negotiates between, what is an idea of civic in a place which has almost nothing. So I would argue not far away from what we saw in the very beginning, or almost in the beginning, the mega factory, the satellite factory, which is due to its size, due to its appearance, what it shows, what it doesn't, whether it's now the bridge and the parking lot, or it's, in this case, the opening and the entrance, it desperately tries to renegotiate an idea of the collective, of the public. So if I push this, and I go towards the end, don't worry, to the very, very extreme, and I ask myself, okay, the big house, the large city, I'll say, of course, it's always stretching it a bit. Here, Muharraq in Bahrain is like this little piece of city. We interpret it almost as one big house. Why did we do that? It's a part in Bahrain where a very, in a way, poor community lives on the one hand. There's a lot of open leftover spaces in a kind of an open maze, in like a very narrow streets. At the same time, it's a part which was singled out by the government and the Department of Culture and Heritage to gradually buy different buildings here, which were related to what was the old tradition of pearling. And pearling, of course, is what was very, very present in the 30s, and then when they found oil, it kind of collapsed, which was in the Gulf. They were kind of on the boats, and they were fishing, diving for pearls, and there was a whole pearl industry. Now this pearl industry is completely gone. I mean, there's still kind of the leftover ephemeral after effect, which is this music some of these groups of men, always men, make, which they do in these dars. I think you will see a glimpse of the dar. I won't show the dar, but we made these dars about 10 years ago in the same context. But here we only want to focus on the pearl path itself, because we were asked to come with a proposal, and we worked on this together with Bas Metz, on how you could make a kind of a path connecting all these kind of Now, UNESCO heritage sites, of course, singled out an old house which was maybe used by a fisherman, an old house by a pearling merchant, another building, and so forth. And going to the mosque and then the mejlis here, and how this could become, in a way, a possible touristic route, you could say. At the same time, we felt that, okay, if you would do that too literal, you would, in a way, kill that fabric. And as I said, with fairly poor inhabitants. So at the same time, we thought it was an opportunity. So how would you make a route? Almost like crumbles, you know, like how can you make crumbles? Point by point by point. And could you use it as a kind of city renewal thing? In other words, transforming all these spots, often close to these kind of particular buildings, as small squares. You see them all here in black, 23 in total, as little rooms in the city, as green rooms in a place which has hardly any of it. So green rooms, I mean, all the ideas of ours, projects we did in the past, but also how green used to be in that part of the world and not anymore. Here you see how that part, Bahrain in Muharraq, was before they built a gigantic highway around it, which is what you see here. So actually, which disconnected it from the castle. I come back to that, so we had to invent a bridge. Here you see one of these dars, which we built in the same context. Actually, this one is in Rifah, not in Muharraq, but we made another one also there. This one is actually in Muharraq. This is purling, as I just I mean, and nowadays the music they make, I mean, it's interesting, the clapping and how the music make. But again, more interesting for me, I mean, is how then could you make this path and how could you use it to introduce a set of spaces, a set of urban spaces, a set of living rooms almost, so to speak, in this context. So here you see the early collages. And here you see how then the project came about. So in a way, we made always almost like these carpets. You see them here, carpets of trees and light columns, and then this dot-like points which connected these. So 23 squares, always the lamps, and the lamps are just far away from each other enough that when you're on one, you see the other. And at the same time, they do not disturb, so they're part of the urban fabric. So if you do not know, they just seem to be lights. So here you see one of these typologies of these squares. I mean, the benches, you see them here. You see the lights. And here you see a mock-up we made in the beginning, and this is how it was made, finally. I think the final version is more beautiful than the mock-up. We somehow reduced a couple of the things, like where the trees are in, and we had to look together with bass and so forth, like what is the right tree, and how do you do that, which tree survives in this heat. The tree, of course, provides shadow. These objects have to be sturdy. There's a water fountain always. There's a bench. And they lay in this urban network, and they replace very often places which were full of cars. So you see them here, you see them make this kind of spaces for kids to play, for people to do other things, like rooms, so to speak, in this gigantic house of Muharraq. So here you see that. So in a way, urban rooms. So you see them again and again. And so indeed, then we had that problem that we had to bridge this gigantic added land, right, this highway. And so we made this, so you follow all the time the lamps, and then, oh, well, there's this enormous bridge. It's a pedestrian bridge, which makes you cross these roads and make you arrive at the castle, which was actually part of that whole, the remains of the castle, of that whole purling as it was, and connects with the water. So you see that here, you see what's left over of the castle, and you see that bridge. The castle brings me to one last comment, and that's really 4 more slides, and then it's over for you guys, so don't worry. So the castle, I guess, may give me that reflection of this, this house, this big house, this small house, the question of the size of the house, and always this gesture. And then even at the smallest of them all, and it's the only house, it's hardly a house, it's actually an artist studio, can have, to a certain extent, that symbolic impact, even though it's very abstract. So here, very small project, we now start building in a few weeks for an artist called Rinus van der Velde. In this area, which is an area which is now prone to inundation. We have these areas, the land's often very low, close to the rivers. People build very irresponsibly, and so when the water is high, big parts inundate. So also, really enough, here there was a house. Somehow, there's all these houses there. They're in a way in a dangerous area. Now, weirdly enough, the artist, perhaps using his fame in some sense, could convince the local authorities that he could maybe still build there. And that was interesting, but of course at the same time problematic. But maybe you could argue that the fact that it's his studio and it's to a certain extent a representative building, it became somehow symbol. So we were fascinated by that. So can that house become also symbol, almost indication, like the fortress you just saw, of the very problem of the site. So we made a very simple studio with a kind of little unit where he could stay on the floor. It's just 2 rooms. There's nothing there. There's just a few cupboards, 1 opening and 2 openings. An entrance here on the side, the stair, as you can see, which you can really see it's a stair, and then 2 stairs to go to the top, one side or the other side. You need the stairs. There's no connection between the 2 floors. This is the section. The house is in a way raised. There's perforations in the bottom. Water can go through. And this is it. Like a small bunker, like a little castle, like a fortress, like an ark. Thank you.